Yeah, I'm Sofia, I'm from Brighton. I'm just going to speak about what libertarianism means to me and how I became a libertarian. So like probably most of you here haven't always been a libertarian. It was a pretty gradual and rational transition I went through from essentially one side of the political spectrum to the other. That being said, thankfully I was never a full-on communist. Especially originally being from Slovakia, had enough of an idea of what that's about not to fall too far down that rabbit hole. Both my parents and grandparents lived through the horror that came with that system, even though my country got a lighter side of it. Not that the middle-class socialists will hear any of that, of course. Anyway, I became quite political in my mid-teens, starting off as a somewhat left-leaning anarchist, but I soon realised that most lefty anarchists seem to find more of an issue with capitalism than the state, which always seemed slightly bizarre to me, since the state was always the root of all evil in my mind. After all, it is the state that holds people back and oppresses them. I also saw the gradual social justice crowd coming in more, which is even more prominent now than it was back then, who are also very much on the authoritarian side of things, though often without realising it. In certain cases, the supposed moral high ground would take the side of authoritarians themselves, instead of supporting freedom of speech, something which I'd always thought was important to the old left in general, but clearly not anymore. Through recognising this, I was introduced to people on the right who spoke against the collectivist ideas of social justice and were in favour of free speech, finally making some sense. I eventually came across a libertarian podcaster from the US called Jason Stapleton, who basically sold libertarianism to me in about an hour, just essentially describing the philosophy in a phrase, saying don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. It sounds stupidly simple, but you can't really argue against it, it just makes sense. So many issues could be prevented if our government governed with this principle in mind. Of course, on top of this, libertarianism also offered an economic system which made a lot of sense, unlike socialism. Libertarianism to me sounds like the best way people can live, enjoying their freedom while also being held responsible for their life decisions. My time at university also, perhaps ironically, allowed me to come to this conclusion. The emphasis and reason and reflecting on our world today has only confirmed my beliefs that state interference is usually a bad idea, and that people and society are best run when left alone and allowed to thrive through mutual respect, trade and cooperation. I think the idea of libertarianism which I find most important is the idea of individualism and voluntarism. The idea that people should be allowed and encouraged to be self-reliant and left to their own devices sounds both empowering and liberating to me. It also seems most logical. After all, what right does the state have to take and misuse your money, spending it on projects you don't agree with or you may never use or even see finished? Individualism and voluntarism also allows people to thrive, both in an entrepreneurial sense and a community sense. There have been many cases of individuals going out of their way to help those less fortunate, only to be punished by the state. A recent case that comes to mind is the lady who decided to use her caravan parked on her own drive to temporarily shelter homeless people during the winter. This was of course met by the local council threatening her with a hefty fine because she didn't have the permission to use her caravan like that. This is just one of many similar cases of individual charity doing a better job than the state, only to be met with hostility. But the fact that things like this happen just goes to show that people don't need coercion or state-enforced morality to help each other. The only state we need is one which intervenes in people's lives as little as possible and doesn't punish charity and kindness. Our modern world was largely built on liberal values of equality before the law and individual freedom, that is both social and economic. But as time goes on, it seems like those in power have lost sight of those vital principles and goals, as we see a steady decline in our rights and liberties as totalitarianism slowly creeps in, with increased surveillance, restriction to our freedom of speech, and a government that is convinced it can run our lives for us. I was glad to discover a philosophy that didn't clash with my anarchism, that is libertarianism, and this party, which certainly hasn't lost sight of those important principles of liberty and freedom. The majority, if not all issues in this country, exist as a result of bad policies created by an extensive government. But for ages it seemed like the only alternative was just the other guy in a different coloured tie, doing the same thing expecting a different result. clearly a sign of madness. Thankfully, libertarianism offers a way out of that, a political philosophy that actually cares about people. I mean, what better way to care about people than giving them back their freedom, economically as well as personally, and finally letting them keep what they earned, allowing them to spend how they see fit. Because no one can run your life better than you, and that is why I'm a libertarian. Thank you.